thank you for joining us at our bookend of our Affordable Housing Roundtable series here this evening. This series has been a set of virtual discussions where we focused on building awareness of what affordable housing is and who it impacts in the area, and why advocating for lower income households matters. The bi-state events have been hosted by Washington Gorge Action Programs, Mid-Columbia Community Action Council, and the organization I work with, Mid-Columbia Housing Authority, in partnership with Comunidades and Nehawa Housing. And throughout the series, we've heard testimonials from local organizations about the challenges low-income households and communities of color face when trying to find safe, affordable, and appropriate housing for themselves and their families. And local elected officials have joined us to share the types of planning efforts and development efforts that are happening in the region to produce more affordable homes. Again, this evening is the bookend to our Affordable Housing Roundtable series. And I want to give an opportunity for each of the organizations that have helped to pull this series together to introduce themselves. But before I do, you can see on the screen that we are sharing just the example of the agenda for this evening. So as we go through those introductions, you can see what's ahead of us here for this evening. Leslie, can you do, oh, and Allison.
Yeah,
yes,
I just wanted to interrupt really quickly and let folks know that interpretation is available, and it's important that all of us select our language preference for this evening, whether you speak English or Spanish. You do need to select a language. And so if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a globe icon, and you should click on that and select either English or Spanish. And if you're an English speaker, that will allow you to hear interpretation when we have Spanish speakers. And if you're a Spanish language speaker, that will allow you to hear the interpretation of the English speaking portion. And I'm going to let Cesar translate that for us.
Buenas tardes. Quería recordar que esta reunión estamos ofreciendo interpretación de inglés a español y español a inglés. Y puedes seleccionar su lenguaje de preferencia utilizando el botón en su pantalla abajo que dice interpretación y seleccionar su lenguaje de preferencia. Si prefiere hablar en español, seleccione español. Si prefiere hablar inglés, seleccione inglés y escuchará en su lenguaje de preferencia. Gracias.
Thank you, Cesar and Allison. As I mentioned, we'll get to hear briefly from the organizations that have helped to pull this series together, and we'll start with Kenny Lapointe.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kenny Lapointe. I'm the Executive Director of Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. We are the community action agency that serves Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties. Our mission is to build a better future for our community through partnership and equity-centered programs that prevent and eliminate poverty and houselessness. It is great to see you all here this evening.
Thank you, Kenny. And Leslie?
And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be here tonight. My name is Leslie Naramore, and I am the Executive Director of Washington Gorge Action Programs, which is the community action agency for Klickitat and Skamania counties. And our mission is strengthening community by inspiring hope and helping people help themselves. Thanks, Joel.
Deborah, if I haven't seen that you've been able to join us, but I'll give you a moment if I've missed you to jump in here. Right, and Deborah is with Nehawa Housing. I'm not going to do their mission statement justice, but their organization is dedicated to addressing tribal members' housing needs and other needs along the Columbia River. Ubaldo?
Thank you. My name is Ubaldo Hernandez. I'm a senior organizer and founder of Comunidades, Amplifying Voices for Environmental and Social Justice. And our work is to enhance or amplify the voices of the needs of the community and the Gorge. Thank you.
Thanks, Ubaldo. And Nate?
Good evening. My name is Nate Stice. I'm Governor Brown's Regional Solutions Coordinator, Oregon Governor Kate Brown's Regional Solutions coordinator for the North Central region. Regional Solutions helps empower communities to meet their community and economic development goals. And I'm grateful for all of the leadership from the other folks who just introduced themselves and letting me tag along with this effort.
Thanks, Nate. And thanks again for joining us. A reminder, our goal for this evening is to provide community members and us with tested messages to better speak about the importance of affordable housing with neighbors, community members, and elected officials. And this evening, we have an opportunity to learn of the important and recent national research on how to talk about affordable housing and to do so in a way that people will truly understand its importance. So again, I'm excited to be here with all of you and really want to extend a heartfelt thank you to my friends and colleagues representing Residents Organizing for Change, or ROC, who will be leading us through the rest of our time here this evening. So I'll pass the virtual mic to Allison McIntosh, who's the Policy and Communications Director at Neighborhood Partnerships.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joel, and everyone for having us here tonight. We're really excited to be joining you. I'm going to pause for just a second and we'll do another set of instructions for interpretation for those of you who have just joined us. If you have just joined us, you will need to enable interpretation for this evening. So you can see at the right-hand bottom of your screen, there should be a globe icon. Go ahead and click on that and select a language, either English or Spanish. Cesar?
Buenas tardes. Esta reunión se está ofreciendo en dos idiomas, en inglés y en español. Para poder escuchar en el idioma de preferencia, puede seleccionar su lenguaje utilizando el botón en su pantalla abajo que dice interpretación y puede seleccionar español. También se les recomienda apagar el audio original. There is a button that says mute original audio, and that will help so you don't hear multiple languages at once. Pueden escuchar en el idioma de preferencia, en español e inglés, escuchando su lenguaje. Gracias.
Thank you, Cesar. And thank you all for being here. We're really excited to be having this conversation with you tonight. I first started learning a little bit about how to talk about values and how to have effective conversations way back when I started working at Neighborhood Partnerships in 2006. And the Housing Alliance, which is the coalition that I work for, which is a legislative advocacy coalition that goes to Salem, had done some original research around how we talk about affordable housing in ways that help people understand why we're doing this work, why it's so important, and who is helped by affordable housing. We decided we needed to get away from talking about numbers and facts and statistics and instead talk about our values and why this work is so important. And that work really changed both the work of the Housing Alliance as well as my work. And I'm just really pleased to be here today to share some very new research that was started just before the pandemic began in 2019 and was led by the work of Community Change, Michael and Cesar's organization, Policy Link, and Race Forward. And there's a couple of really exciting things about this research that you're going to hear about tonight. It does an amazing job of incorporating some learnings from some earlier research on how we talk about race and class. It talks about the importance of people with lived experience, and it's really grounded in values. So I'm so thrilled that we're all here tonight to have this conversation with you all and just really looking forward to this. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and we will get our presentation underway. Oops, no, wrong button. The best part about Zoom and sharing your screen is that everyone can watch you and how well you navigate Zoom. It's great. It's fantastic. So like I said, we're going to share some new research, the housing justice narrative, and putting that research into action. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cesar, and we're going to do an opening exercise.
Thank you, Allison. I hope I don't freeze on all of you because I've been having Zoom connectivity issues. So bear with us if we do. So part of what we're trying to do in our communities is about changing issues that are impacting our communities. And in order to get there, we need to have a vision of where we're going. One of my mentors once told me, if you don't know where you're headed, any road will take you there. Right? And so we got to be clear about what we want to accomplish so that we can begin to figure out what the path is that it's going to take for us to get there. So as we get to know each other for a few minutes, and we're going to be divided into small breakout groups, we want you to reflect on a couple of questions. One, what does home mean to you? For many people, it can mean family, it could mean security. What does it mean to you?
We lost Cesar for just a second. I will pick up and we'll get him back. So the second question we would love to have you reflect on is, what would the Gorge look like to you if everyone had a safe and stable place to call home? What would your community look like? What would it be like? What would it feel like? And then lastly, what has brought you to this training today? And so we're going to divide into small groups. And we're going to have you all spend a few minutes talking about those questions. We're going to divide you into groups, I think, of 4 folks. If you are a Spanish speaker, if you want to go ahead and stay in this main room, we will, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your faces. If you're a Spanish language speaker, please stay in this main room. Sound good? All right, let's do some breakout rooms. All right, so I'm gonna click create and you should get a pop-up screen that says join this breakout room. And I believe we are going to spend about 15 minutes in the breakout room. So take your time, introduce yourself to your fellow Zoom room people. Hi, everyone. I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and mute themselves so we make sure we don't get too much background noise. And let me make sure all the breakout rooms are closed.
Allison, I also want to remind everyone to please select their language of preference. So, por favor, seleccionen su lenguaje de preferencia utilizando el botón de interpretación en la parte de la pantalla de abajo. So please select your language of preference using the interpretation feature in Zoom. It's at the bottom of your screen. You can see a globe. And if you click on that, you can choose English or Spanish. And if you unmute the original audio, you will not hear multiple languages. Thank you.
Thanks, Cesar. All right, Cesar, do you want to finish our exercise here?
Yes, so apologies for the tech issues. Hopefully I won't freeze on you again. But part of what gives us power is the relationships that we build with each other. And hopefully in these small breakout groups that you all were in, you were able to not only hear about other people, but that you were also able to see yourselves in others. And so I'd like to open up the room for anyone who'd like to share a little bit about either what you shared or what you heard in your small breakout group, and also encourage you to share in the chat if you are so inclined. So if anyone would like to share what home means to you, or what your community would look like if everyone had safe, affordable housing, I'll open up the mic. I think Michael, I see Michael held. Did you got off mute, or does anyone want to start? I can call on people.
Oh, I'm always good at starting things.
Thank you, Joe. Go for it.
Well, when I mentioned everything in that was the last question about what brought me here today in that, and I wanted to say a major thank you to both Allison and Raina, and that for actually really getting me going. And that 11 years ago, I met Allison at a Housing Opportunity Day, and then we came across each other over the years, and then we formed Rock in that a couple years ago, and which has been a big thing for me. So I think both of them, those are the main two reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, and being able to advocate and talk for people who don't have a voice.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you. Anyone else want to share? What does home mean to you, or why are you here this afternoon?
What does home mean to me was a really interesting conversation in my group. We were talking from a place of privilege versus a place of people with lived experience, and how it can mean differently. With lived experience, it means more security and safety. And then when it was from a place of privilege, there was more words like comfort and calm and things like that. And I found that very interesting.
Thank you so much, Amber. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Thank you.
Actually, just kind of piggybacking on what the young lady said. I have lived experience 2 different times being homeless. And the second time was probably I say the best and worst, because the first time I was by myself. The second time I was with my 16-year-old daughter and 1-year-old granddaughter. And so we couch surfed, we slept in the car. And there was times where they slept in a friend's home and I would sleep in the car on the outside there. So it really is. And I don't think in our group, we didn't break it up between the two. And I think that really is a big difference between lived experience and place of privilege. And someone one time asked me, well, how long have you experienced housing instability? Since I was a kid. We've always had problems. But what home means to me is independence and love. I mean, of course, it can mean so many other things, but being able to go to your own shower and not have to ask someone to use their kitchen and things like that. And one thing I always teach my granddaughter is really wherever there's family, then there's home. So as long as you're a family, then you're together in your home.
Thank you, James. Appreciate you. Anyone else? And please also add in the chat. What did you hear? What would your community look like if, or what would it feel like? Allison asked you, what would it feel like, right? That's something powerful when you feel something. So what would it feel like if your community had the opportunity for everyone to be housed and feel safe and secure and independent? What would that mean for your community?
I answered that question in maybe an unexpected way because I said it would make my job easier. And I know that sounds really selfish, but I'm here in Skamania County. 92% of our county is undevelopable. So there's not a lot of literal place for people. Last time I checked in the county, there were 0 rentals. So, it's literally difficult for people to have a physical location. And Kurt knows because he's in the county here with me, right, Kurt? And he might agree that it would make his job easier. He wouldn't have a job, but, as well, because I work with low-income adults and dislocated workers and help them bridge the gap to employment at People for People. But it's hard to talk employment sometimes when people are worrying about, are they going to lose housing? And then they're worried, not only are they going to lose housing because they're not working, but are they going to lose housing because they're in subsidized housing and then they're going to make too much, right? So, they're like in this gray area where, they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. And so working with them with those hurdles, and if everyone had that stability of home, however that looks, then there's so much more we could do for them if they had that security. So
thank you, Liz.
That's what I thought.
Appreciate you. And really what I heard is, talking about how, home is definitely connected to the economic sustainability of our communities, and every worker and every individual contributes one way or another to the success of our local economies, right? And so how can we not only think about those that work in a formal sector, but also those that work at home, literally, right? Caregivers, childcare providers, home-based providers, and others. And I also, heard you talk about what it means to be specific about our communities, and that there isn't like a one size fits all answer, right? And to include those that are living that situation, like Kurt, who understands his community and can give you a better idea of what might work and how we remove the barriers that exist, that it's not an individual's fault, that there's systemic issues that we need to address in order to remove the barriers that are creating these obstacles for people to remain housed or to even access housing, correct? So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this issue, but I think one of the most important things is that we begin, as I mentioned earlier, that we begin to see ourselves among each other, and that it's not somebody else's problem, or that it's not just my problem, and that if we begin to think about what we want to accomplish together, then we will begin to identify the path that it's going to take for us to get there. So I appreciate that, and we'll encourage you to continue to add your thoughts in the chat about what it means to you. But more importantly, this work is something that is not just theoretical. It's something that is happening now, and it's not only in one part of Oregon, it's happening in different parts of Oregon. And this idea of those that are most directly impacted, and the importance of them and people with lived experience being at the center of the housing justice work is critical. And so I am proud and honored to invite my friend Mandy Seeley, a leader from Sisters Oregon and a leader with ROC, to share with you about her experience, about how this work that we're going to be talking about is being used in her community, so that you can see that this is something that is real and is something that is doable. So Mandy.
Thank you, Cesar. Hi, everyone. I'm grateful to share this space with all of you tonight. So I was an advocate before I moved to Oregon 6 years ago. I'd experienced housing instability throughout my life, but it never dawned on me that I could do anything about the problem, or that the problem didn't have anything to do with me specifically. It wasn't until a friend asked me to join a group of locals to help create the first cold weather shelter in my community, and she said my perspective would be invaluable. That lit the fire. For context, I spent 7 months in a tent and over 2 years in an RV in the forest surrounding Sisters with my family and our dog. Our unhoused neighbors live in the forest instead of the streets out here, so they're more hidden. In the beginning, I just shared my story of what it was like to live and work with children in a community that we couldn't afford to live in. When COVID hit, I was making $19 an hour, and even that wasn't a living wage. The housing crisis is intersectional, and it's about more than just housing, which itself is a social determinant of health. It also affects areas like childcare. I was very lucky because my employer was a local childcare provider. If it weren't for them, I couldn't have afforded care at all, and therefore couldn't work. Education. When schools went virtual due to the pandemic, I had to pull my kids out until they were able to go back in person because Wi-Fi isn't reliable in the forest. Employment. I was denied jobs because of my living situation, and when I was employed, I was at the mercy of the city showers and whether they were closed for service or not. Nobody wants a dirty, houseless person cleaning their hotel rooms, which is the job I had when I lived in the tent. Environment. It's not only dangerous to live outside in the winter anymore. We have deadly heat waves, wildfire smoke, and even wind can put safety at risk. Once, during an extreme windstorm, a tree fell where our RV had been if we hadn't just moved it. My children slept in the loft of our rig, and they could have been killed if we'd still been there. I'd like to address 3 topics I've heard your community has been struggling with lately. The first, workforce housing. It sounds good, and it seems to imply that said housing will include our entire workforce, but it's really code for middle housing, which is between 60 and 120% average median income. In sisters, that's anywhere from 36K to over 60K per year. One of our local restaurants has 7 unhoused employees alone, and none of them would qualify for workforce housing under those terms. I'm not against middle housing. I see the need for every type. 2, navigation centers. I personally look at housing as a ladder, with each step getting people closer to the top, or whatever their ideal living situation is. Navigation centers are the bottom step. At the very least, they offer basic needs and keep vulnerable people safe, but they are so much more than that. They are one of the few places folks can go where others want them to succeed and will help them reach their goals. They're a hub for relationship building, which is crucial to start breaking down those barriers, keeping them in their current situation. 3, crime and houselessness. This is one of my favorite arguments because a simple Google search will show that people experiencing houselessness are way more likely to become a victim of crime than to commit one themselves. And for those that do resort to crime, there's a reason for it. By bringing people in and learning what those reasons are, we can help them move past them, and that benefits everyone. Thanks to the housing justice narrative research, I now have the tools I need to feel more confident as an advocate. I know what to say using the messages from this research, who to say it to based on my goal, and how to say it to be most effective using the message box and story itself, because the message will change depending on who you're talking to and what you're trying to accomplish. I've presented at city council meetings and to legislators, at local forums and community conversations, and I've seen this shift firsthand. People relate better to stories than random facts or statistics. In Sisters, people went from thinking that there were no unhoused people here to seeing me in the paper and everywhere else talking about it from experience, and they can't ignore it anymore. I'm very persistent. I also coordinate a group that meets monthly to talk about houselessness and how we can put a dent in it. This group has doubled in size since I took over last year, and I take every opportunity I can to educate them on the reality of living outside and how they can be a part of the movement. That group includes a county commissioner, our city manager, the district ranger, law enforcement, service providers, and other community members who see the housing crisis in real time. Building those relationships has enabled me to contact any of them when I have a concern or question and have a conversation about it. And sometimes those conversations lead to change. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, "Oh, I never thought about it like that." And no one would, unless they'd lived through it themselves or someone explained it to them from that perspective. And unfortunately, have to be told over and over again. Repetition is key. In terms of people of power, you can't let them forget that their decisions have an impact on real people. We need people with lived experience of housing instability on the front lines, sharing their stories, and having a seat at the tables where decisions are being made. We are the experts. My favorite method of advocacy is a one-on-one conversation, especially in a small rural community where we're destined to run into each other again. When you sit down with someone without the pressure of a group, you learn so much about them, where they're coming from, and why they feel the way they do. And armed with the messages provided today, you'll be able to find values they resonate with and start to plant the seed to make change. Nobody can argue with children deserving a safe, warm place to sleep at night. This is how we not only build our base, but also how we build community. And a community effort is how we're going to end housing instability once and for all. Now, I'll hand it over to Joel and Kenny to chime in about how they've used the values-based messaging to make a difference in their community. Thank you.
After you, my friend, Kenny.
Mandy, that was super great. And you pretty much like nailed some of my comments that are very real in our community as of this week. And you talked about navigation centers, and we are the lead on developing a navigation center in the Dalles, and we've received resources to do that and donated land, and we're starting to see significant, not in my backyard, syndrome pop up to the effect of there being a coordinated community meeting happening right now in the Dalles to talk about crime, littering, and all that being derived from homelessness. And my response to that, I had to actually pull back a bit and make sure that I centered myself in values. And I actually will thank my counterpart, Joel, over here for helping center me. And I do want to say that I use my peers to help make sure that I can keep my center. But one of the things that I had to remind myself is that we have community support, and that the work that we're doing is important to creating a better community. And it's through collaboration. And community and collaboration are both core values of my agency. And those are things that I had to really stick to in my responses. And I made sure that I centered those responses around that and talked about the fact that my agency would be building a better community. At the end of the day, I know things will be better for people because we're seeing success. And I did actually use the term crime is not synonymous with houselessness. And that's a very dangerous standpoint for people to come from because it can result in harm to very valuable community members. And I will say that I have people who work for me who live in our shelter but cannot find housing. And if something happened to one of them as a result of that sort of sentiment, it would be devastating.
Thanks for sharing, Kenny. And Mandy, thank you so much for lifting up your story and sharing and reminding us the importance of our work. We've certainly seen successes, and I know Leslie could talk about this and Kenny as well, but value statement that's worked for us around acknowledging that healthy habits take root more easily in stable, affordable homes. We know that when people have a roof over their head, can shower, can cook food, have that stability that a home provides, we're going to be healthier as a community and certainly healthier as a person in that stable, affordable home. And that's a value statement that's helped us achieve partnerships and successes in getting people stably housed throughout our community.
Thank you both. And thank you so much, Mandy, for sharing how you have seen this work translate into the work you do in Sisters. I'm so glad you are here tonight. And I know we're going to have lots of conversation as we go. But now I'm going to turn it over to Katya, who is another RAC member and a fellow with the Housing Justice Narrative. And she's going to walk us through the research.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Katya Salas-Neva, and I'm a community organizer and proud RAC member from Portland, Oregon. I use she, her pronouns. And so before I jump into some of the key findings and the research, one, I want to say, please put your questions in the chat or hold on and then you can unmute yourself after. We'll have a Q&A session. But I also wanted to briefly talk about how this research came about. So, perfect. Okay. So the research that we're here to learn about, and I will talk about, it built on methodology and learnings of Demo's Race Class Narrative Project, and I encourage everyone to Google that. So this work started with language analysis of housing discourse. And in early 2019, this work was conducted by Anat Shinker-Osario. So basically she looked at how housing is talked about in media, advocacy, and politics. Her research laid the groundwork to answer the question, how do people take in information about housing? And this project expanded on that. There were lots of in-person focus groups. This was before we could all meet in person, and of course, online dial surveys. And those were conducted by the Lake Research Partners. The research did oversample African-American, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans. And this was to get a richer understanding of how these specific groups identified the issue and what are some of the things that resonate with them to bring them into the larger movement. And there was also oversampling in Washington state, those living below 200% of federal poverty line, as well as advocates and organizers. For more information and a deeper kind of dive into those sample questions and statements, please, again, Google search or go to housingnarrative.org. You'll be able to find all of that. Next slide, please. And so what did the research tell us? Well, it confirmed what we already know and knew, that America is ready for a national conversation on housing. We already know that this is East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, East, South, North, from California to New York, everyone in between. This is a national issue. Housing conversations on everyone's mind right now. And in addition, with the pandemic being as volatile as it is and has been, I believe this point has gotten more evident. The research confirms that, more specifically, it showed that 8 out of 10 people polled get that housing is a huge challenge for way too many people. And furthermore, people also get that housing is a basic need, and we need housing to thrive. Next slide, please. So the second key findings from the research tells us that the majority of people see the role of government in addressing the housing crisis. They see it as a top issue and want government to act. And we've seen this happen, right? We've seen voters step up and invest public money. This happened in Portland, where I'm at. We've seen this in Vancouver, Washington, many other cities across the nation. We want the government to do the same and step up. But interestingly, with the research identified is that adults, especially people of color, those in urban areas, and Democrats see the role of both the federal and the local government in ensuring affordable housing. The base and the persuadables, however, support the role of the local government more and lean towards the local government as stepping in. Next slide, please. Another thing that resonated with people was the framework of housing as a basic human need. People are entirely there. They want people to have this basic need met. And although you and I may think housing is a human right, and we hear that and we say that quite often, the research does not show that at this time, that's the message that we should be putting out there. People react negatively to absolutes, especially the persuadables. And so the research suggests that avoiding using language like guarantee or right. And to quote the person I mentioned who kind of started some of this research, Anat Shinkarsario, who kind of, like I said, pioneered this, she says, rights evoke the frame of property rights and exclusive ownership. So if we're going to move away from these dominant narratives and ideas, we may be better off speaking in the language of need and related concepts. So shifting the home or housing to a place to live, it has the ability to perform this function, and it moves us from the object to what the object enables in human-centered terms. Next slide, please. And the last key takeaway finding that I will mention, research tells us that we don't need to convince people. Polls since the recession consistently have shown that more than half of Americans have been forced to make significant life choices to afford housing. For many, that means taking additional jobs, having to stop saving for retirement, stop paying for healthcare, and many other sacrifices people are making. And if people do not know of the problem personally, they definitely know someone in their family or in their church or their friend circle that's willing to keep up with their housing expenses. And the research also shows that we don't need to say affordable to increase support for housing or define the crisis. It is baked in already in how people understand the issue. So while the top key findings of research are very promising for building a powerful movement for housing justice, the research also reveals that there are some challenges, and I will talk about that just in a sec. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, while there's some promise, like I said, the findings of research are promising for building a powerful movement, the research reveals that the greatest challenge is increasing people's intensity. Our first and foremost significant barrier in increasing people's intensity is the powerful frame in the dominant narrative, and that is that housing is a commodity. First, housing is a commodity, right? Housing is something we buy, we sell, and frankly is a keystone commodity in our capitalist society. So rightfully, most people think about how much rent costs or how much they can save for their family's future by purchasing a house, or how they can retire, right, when they sell the house. But of course, housing is so much more than a commodity. It is a home, and we all talked about it in the introduction, right, in our breakout groups. Home is where we live, and to increase that intensity, we must shift the narrative from this commodity frame to a frame of a home, and all that means to our well-being. What does the home mean to you? Next slide, please. The second major barrier to increasing people's intensity is that our housing catastrophe is used in, like, how did we get into this mess? Who's responsible for making the mess? And what we need to do to find solutions that work for all of us. So what are some of the things we can do to help us increase that intensity and address commodification of housing and the confusion around this possibility? Well, let me tell you. Next slide. There are 4 strategies that the research proposes. And so the first strategy is increasing intensity, is that we need to be clear about the role of racism in our broken housing system. We need to be real about how racism drives our housing policy, because it is true and is part of our lived experience of the people who want to bring to our base. In fact, we believe that centering race is an essential thing for building the movement capable of winning the housing justice we all seek. Next slide. The second strategy is to center lived experience in our organizing and advocacy. Nothing, I mean nothing, you heard Mandy, is more powerful to break through the dominant housing as a commodity narrative than a real person sharing their story. The people closest to the problem in our broken housing system are the people we need to help us identify and win those solutions. Next slide. The third strategy is we need to be bold in the housing solutions we pursue. The public wants policy solutions that make a real difference. And that really makes things better for people, right? To get people excited and engaged, we need to go big or go home. Band-aids are no longer acceptable in this. And the fourth strategy is to use widely held and deeply felt values that most people hold around housing and home. The power of values-based messaging is something we known for a while now, and we need to use them when we do our work. And so next slide. And so what you see on your screen are those top value-based messages. Solid majority agreed with all value statements, but there are 4 specific values that are so strong we consider them core values. And these values are like children deserve a roof over their head, shelter being a basic human need, filling between housing and a job, and calling out discrimination in housing are all core values. And I will add that the persuadables are especially children focused. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to show you a video for all of you to watch. This is from our friends in St. Paul, who recently passed the most progressive rent control policy in the nation. And this is an example of how some of the narrative research that I just talked about and the tools, which we will learn about in a few minutes, can be applied to local campaigns and what they look like. To be honest, this is a story of a David and Goliath. The opposition, I think, had like $4 million campaign budget compared to 250,000 for the advocates. And so, but what I think the advocates really do well here is emphasize sense of belonging. And they definitely don't shy away from leading with racial justice and having that at the forefront. So some of the core values that I just mentioned. Allison, can you roll the tape?
Hoping that Michael can. Sorry.
Oh, Michael. All right, Michael.
Sorry.
I can. Give me one moment here.
Thank you.
It's all right.
And yes, the question in the chat, we will absolutely share the slides for sure.
Be a voter.
We have the power to make a better St. Paul.
I was able to kind of just build that sense of home here and that sense of stability as well.
As a homeowner, I hate to see renters who come into the community, have roots here for a year, and then they're like, oh, I gotta move because I can't afford it here anymore.
We need to keep the people that are here. I don't want to have to see people moving out of the city because they can't afford to live here.
I think it's a privilege being young and being able to live with all my roommates and my friends who are more like my chosen family.
I think it's great that in my neighborhood, I know all my neighbors. And when new people come in, we welcome them. Housing justice is racial justice.
Our cities thrive when our neighbors can stick together.
Stability is good for students in schools.
Vote yes for rent stabilization to keep St. Paul home.
Be a voter.
Katia, shall we go back to the slideshow?
Yeah. I think we're just going to do some Q&As. Yeah. But
awesome. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do some Q&A.
I know there's a lot of information that I just kind of like told you all. So don't be afraid if there's just clarifying questions. They don't have to be like, you know, deep existential kind of questions. It could just be like, hey, what did you say there?
We have some questions. Go ahead, Heather.
We're in the Dalles and we have a real strong church-based Habitat for Humanity program here. And it's extremely frustrating because I consider it a housing commodity contest. And the group that runs it focuses specifically on single adult head of household with children. And so if you're anything else, you're not considered possible for it. And the rental housing of inequality in this town has an income limitation. You have to net a certain level of income before you qualify for the rental housing. Even if you can make the monthly rent, you have to make what we run across is the middle $36,000 a year. You have to prove that your income is $36,000 a year after taxes. And I just wanted to know what kind of messages your organization had for those kinds of issues.
I can jump in. I think, oh, did I freeze? No? Okay, I'm frozen in my frame for some odd reason. I think, you know, the stories that Mandy brought up, right, about just kind of bringing in the humanity and bringing in like the different that houseless and homelessness can affect so many. And so when, yes, you know, she talked about the workforce housing, right, which is 30+ K a year, but not yet about those that are below that, and always kind of redirecting, pivoting the conversations that includes everyone and housing for all and the children, right? Like I said, the biggest messages or the strongest is that resonated with people is bringing in children. So all children deserve housing. And sometimes, you know, when people start offering like, well, we're building housing for this type of, they can't argue when you say all children deserve a place to live safe and affordable housing. So I would just pivot to that we all humans, it's a basic need. Without housing, it's a foundation for a lot of things. If person is housed, a lot of things fall into place for them. So it's pivoting always to having an inclusive message. I would say that would be my answer. Yeah, thank you, Cesar, in the chat. Everyone is deserving, right, of the safe and affordable housing, definitely.
I have a question. What would the research indicate, or what would you consider a strategy in dealing with the idea that there are marginalized populations where some of the barriers to engaging in housing activism or seeking, being more successful in obtaining housing, but don't do so because of the broken promises, the Native American and the treaties that have been broken time and time again. The promises have been made to the disenfranchised that are reversed or ignored or recanted. And it's not, there are a number of, I think, there are sectors of the population that have historically experienced that, and why would they have put any faith into governmental or community or whatever program when they, I guess there would be a fair amount of disbelief or distrust.
Anybody else wants to take it out of the panel? No? Oh, Allison.
I think Cesar is right that we have to be honest and real and acknowledge those failures, right? If we come in with a message that is too cheery and doesn't acknowledge those past harms, we're not being true to history or to the reality of people's circumstance, right? We have to acknowledge the failings, and then we have to talk about how we're going to do things differently and better. And maybe it's about working together to hold a government entity responsible or accountable, but we can't just gloss over the past harms. We have to acknowledge them, right? Michael, what would you add?
Well, I think you said a lot of it. I think that the other element, this goes back to why it's so important for us to have the vision of the community that we want, because that's what's going to inspire messages. I wrote this in the chat, but I just want to go a little further. These messages aren't a magic bullet that if you say them, all of a sudden the person who never wanted the navigation center is going to be like, yeah, that's the best idea I've ever heard. But oftentimes, one of the characteristics of NIMBYs is to be the loudest people in the room. And so what that means is, because most of us don't really like conflict, especially in our own community, that there's a lot of people who would be with us. But right now, that loud shouting of the NIMBYism, understandably, hey, who wants to mess with that? But when we can create an urgency by showing the positive vision of what we could all be, when we all had the stability and platform that home is, that begins to change the proposition. Now we're talking about a Hood River, a Dalles, a White Salmon, that people are like, yeah, that's the community I want to be a part of. All of us hurt in different ways when we see the way that our broken fabric of society lets people fall through. And so when we present that positive vision, that's speaking to people who right now might be silent, but upon hearing us, they could come in and be part of what we're trying to do together.
Don, you want to chime in?
Yeah, could I suggest that what I've found is the key to building trust is to set aside your agenda and listen. People are suspicious of people coming in with their agendas, whether they be the government or they be an organization or they be a social worker or what have you. And most of us approach listening with agendas, but actually listening and showing that you've heard them and it's okay to hear them and stuff, then they're going to listen probably to you at that point. But it's that building that initial, and you're right, a lot of people have a real reason to be skeptical of do-gooders. And I can say that as a MSW social worker. That's my background, but it is actually listening to people. And I would say that's the other issue in talking with those people who oppose you, is really try to understand what's at the core of their deal, what their fears and stuff are, because a lot of their fears they're, I wouldn't say baseless, they're based on something, but it's not reality. So that's my thoughts.
And can I just add something? And, and we'll also probably have to come to terms that maybe opposition will never join us, right? And we have to focus on our base and making it stronger. And those persuadables that are kind of like those confused people that I talked about, right? They're not sure what the right solutions is, and maybe we just leave the opposition to themselves,
Yeah, I think what I've learned the most with the research, which is refreshing, I have to tell you, is that, and speaking for myself, that for someone who thinks that they have a good pulse on the inequities of housing, that the research clearly tells us that it's not the issues that are the real powerful tools, it's the language that we use. And we're just beginning to use words like racial injustice and equality, but it's so much more than that. It's about equity and what that really means, and bringing these disenfranchised and doubtful voices, because our obstacles aren't just the ones who don't want it, it's the ones who don't believe it. And the ones who don't believe it are the ones that we're fighting on their, we're standing up on their behalf. And so we have two fronts that we're working on, and it's all so important on the language that we use.
Thank you. We do need to get to a break, but I know Ubaldo had a question, and then we'll go to maybe Joe, we can talk during the break. Ubaldo?
Thank you. I just want to comment on this. Everybody has an agenda, and we as a community organizers, we have an agenda. We want to help and support our community. And one of the things is that agenda is clear for the community to understand, and also to the honesty that comes from those agendas. One of the things is we live in the Gorge is a small community where everybody knows each other, and you see everybody that works on these organizations to help solve the housing issues, but they know the contractors, they know the real estate agents, and probably they don't want to get in a bad reputation with them, I mean, they have to according for business, they have to moderate their language. They cannot be too aggressive. And in reality, it's not really advocating for our community, because a lot of these times, these real estate agents, these landlords, they are really aggressive. And in our communities, one of the things that I talk constantly to members of the community, and they are identified as constantly as economic predators. And that's the way the community sees them. We have a lot of people that rent, and they feel oppressed by these renters. Myself, I just this year I got a rental agreement for a contract where the landlord became really aggressive. That doesn't feel good that you are living on that place. Where they tell you, if you get sick, you lose your job, you are out. We don't care. If you miss the train payment, one day you have to pay $100. So making sure that they are gonna make you feel bad for living there, and they're gonna raise the rent to the next person, and they're clear on that. So you can afford and pay the rent right now, I'll find somebody who's gonna pay more. And this is one of the things that our community, we face that on a daily basis with the real estate agencies, or now that people want to find another home, another house to live because they can afford you need to have at least $5,000 to move out. and then the regulations from renters, what you can do, what can't do in the place you're renting, how many people can rent, how many people cannot rent. There is a lot of people that can't rent because they have a kid. Honestly, that's an issue that we have with family. But there is not much to do. And the other thing for us here in this small community, this is not a big city. So we don't have that much housing around to play with, to say, okay, we can find some other place in the other side of the city. No, like we just heard earlier, in Stevenson, there is 0 rents, and we have a limited space for rents or to live, to develop in these areas. And one other thing is, and we see our rents are increasing, and our people that have been living in these areas for more than 20 years, working on the orchards, working in packing houses, always providing for this community, they've been forced to move out of the city limits, far away from where they live, increasing the cost of living, because they're going to other places where they have to pay more. They have to pay more for transportation, babysitting, and all those issues. And unfortunately, our community, poor community, is the one who has to pay the prices for it. And we don't have that many options. We only rely on somebody who can develop some ideas on how to control the rent, how to control the abuse for those renters, for those real estates. Because I've been in some other conversations about housing development, but how long is it gonna take? And unfortunately, for people like me, the problem is today, it's right now, it's tomorrow, it's next month. We can wait another 5 years, another 3 years to another house development. So this is one of the things that when we want to advocate for the community, we have to think about what's happening right now and how they're dealing with the situation right now. And one of the things I see that a lot of value to see in the future for those housing developments, and those are good. But unfortunately, there is people right now that are losing their houses because they can afford to pay. And there is families, families that have to live in a home, 3 families, but the landlord shouldn't know that, so they're hiding for that. So all those homeless that we can count because they're still living in somebody's home, So for me, it's a lot more important to look at our community and see how we can solve that, and invite people to be brave and be bold. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ubaldo, for sharing that and really highlighting the urgency of what community members are dealing with and struggling with right now, and the power imbalances between landlords and people who rent from them is so real and so impactful on people's lives. So thank you so much for lifting that up. And really, just to circle it back around to the research, I think absolutely you're right on that being bold in this moment in particular is so important. So thank you. We're going to go to break. Joe, I'm going to cut you off, but I'm going to stick around and we'll talk at the break. So come back, take a quick stretch break, bathroom break, and be back here at 6:21. Do it. Okay, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the message box.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. So next slide, Allison. So clearly this is not an issue that's like an easy one. The feelings that are in our communities and what we're trying to do and what some other folks want to do, these aren't something that we can just snap our fingers and get out of it. And as a matter of fact, that's why we're so excited about the research. And to build a little on, and I'm going to not call your name out because I can't recall it right now, but the gentleman who was making the point about listening, and a couple of different people have talked about listening. The purpose of this research was to listen in a very targeted way to try to get a deeper understanding of how it is that we need to talk to the people, not, again, the people who are totally disagree with us and are always gonna, have opinions and stereotypes about how they think about these issues. But those others in our community who, like a lot of us, are of many minds at one time. And the way to move and connect with people really is about a persistence and a resonance, connecting with people over time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a tool that matches really well with this research, because the research is geared to be resonant. And this tool is going to help us be persistent and stay on the same page as we talk to fellow community members, decision makers, and other people that we need to get aboard. So next slide, please, Allison. Rhonda, I don't think we're going to get into that today. We're really going to talk about the communication strategy and not the issue breakdown. It is a very important topic. What we're going to talk about is one of the most important ways to be persistent and resonant is to speak with one voice. Now, that doesn't mean all of us saying the same thing. And in fact, everything what we've said about our own stories with lived experience, and those of us who may not have personal lived experience but have been working in this field and know what people are experiencing. How can we take that diversity of experience and talk together in such a way that we can have that power of one voice? So right now we're looking at one single person in a boat rowing upriver. And I know when I started in this work, because I really believe in homes for all, that sometimes I would feel a righteousness of just making the arguments that were the best way I could. But I was alone rowing upstream. Next slide. But oh, you got to hit a couple here, hit another one. But this boat is always going to beat that little boat. And the reason is, one more. Sorry, Allison. The reason is because it's a group of people working together in concert to figure out how to, by being coordinated with one another, they can get their ship moving in the fastest possible direction. That's speaking with one voice. Next slide. Because one of the things that we need, and this was mentioned, I believe, by Katya, is the importance of repetition. And, somebody made the great comment, well, do you think that the realtors influence the way people understand these issues and frame it? Heck yeah. And they have big advertising budgets, and they always repeat, home is the American dream, home is the American dream. Well, we need to take that same strategy, not saying home is the American dream, but the strategy of keep repeating what we know is true and what we know is resonant and can help us connect with people who will join us in the movement. Next slide. So when we think about doing this, and this is another animation slide, Allison, I'm sorry. There's three elements to trying to connect with people and make our case. The first is we need to tell them what's wrong. So hit the next slide button, Allison. The second is the statement of the value frame, or why should they care? Next slide. And then the third is the statement of solution. What should we do about it? What's the policy? What's the action that we can take that can make a difference? So when we put all these elements together, it puts us in a very powerful place of connecting with people and bringing them along to the vision that we want them to join us within. Next slide, please. So this is a very simple tool. It's called the message box. Some of you may have seen it before. It was sent out as a handout. If you had the opportunity to print it out, that's great. If not, we're going to do an exercise. And it's going to begin as I'm talking here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just take a piece of paper, if you have one, and draw an X across it. So it's just the same simple box. And this box is how, that phrase that says, we got to think outside the box. The message box is the exact opposite. We need to speak inside the box. This is a tool when we work on it together and make it stronger that will both allow us to tell our own stories and personalize those stories, while at the same time giving us some guidance and that ability to get the power of repetition going. Next slide, please. So very briefly, the 4 boxes to explain them. The top is the vision. We're going to come back to this, but this is what we talked about at the beginning. What's our vision for our community when we all had home? And we need to have this aspiration to put out there to inspire people, to bring them along with us. The columns on the left and the right are always related to one another. What's the problem? What's going wrong? And what's the solution that's going to make a difference in the problem, that's going to make that family stronger, that's going to make our community stronger? And then finally, in the bottom quadrant, this is where these value statements come in that really helped us connect with people, because of the research already let us know these are the phrases, these are the message frames that are deeply resonant with people. Next slide. So what we're gonna do here is begin to fill in the different quadrants of our own message box. So again, either if you have the worksheet and you printed it out, or if you just have a blank piece of paper, write it in the top quadrant. I want all of us to take 2 or 3 minutes to write down a couple things that came up when we thought about what would the Columbia River Gorge, what would the community you live in, how would it be better? How would it be stronger if we all had a place to go home? So let's take about 2 minutes to fill it in. Doesn't need to be perfect tonight, but we want to get our juices flowing here. I wish we had some music while you're working. I would sing, but you probably would mute me pretty quickly.
I'm just going to stop sharing so I can put the worksheet in the chat while you all work. Keep going.
Again, we're working on the vision quadrant. What would our communities look like if all of us had home? Again, it doesn't need to be perfect tonight. We can build on this as we move forward into our everyday work. All right, if we can go back to the slides, thank you. Advance to, oh yeah, thank you. Oh, I put another animation, no wonder. Wow, that's wonderful. One more, Allison, just hit it one more time. One more time. So when we think about, and I'm sorry that that these slides had so many animations. When we think about the message box, back to what Katya was talking about what the different aspects of the research and the 4 strategies, this is how they sort of fit inside the message box, inside the quadrants. Next slide, please. So we put together, for the purposes of tonight, and with the help of Joel, we put together a message box that already has some information about the gorge. It's at a high level. It's not about a specific campaign or a specific development. But what we want to do here, and Allison, if you don't mind, next slide. I got thrown off just a second there. So this is what we were just working on, the vision slide. One more, please, Allison. And just a little bit to go deeper on the importance of this vision and us putting a vision out there. It's this quote from James Baldwin. And in part, the imagination, this goes back to the comment about the realtors, not just the realtors, but the realtors very much part of it, have really taken up a lot of the oxygen in the imagination of what home is and why it's important. And so partly our job is, with our vision, is to begin to give people a different way to see things, begin to shift that calcified, locked-in view of home as commodity. Next slide, please. So we did this. We just filled in the vision quadrant with our visions for homes for all. So once again, Allison, next slide. So now we're going to work on the problem and solution statement. And as we said, Joel helped us get going with some high-level problem and solution statements. What I'd like you to do is, if you have that worksheet in front of you, underneath where the text is that's already about the Columbia River Gorge, go a little bit specific, personalize it. Talk about what the problem looks like in your community and what's a solution that would help the problem that you addressed. Okay, remember, these things always connect with one another. It goes back to what Mandy was saying about the message box, is once we create this, we can use this for a lot of different issues, because it's the problem and solution we can always change as we're getting into specifics. So I'm going to ask us again to take about 2 minutes to add a little bit to those problem and solution statements that you have in the worksheet. Allison, if you go to the next slide while people are working, please. I'm sorry that this is small print, but this is so it's in the right and left quadrants. Use that blank space to make it more real, to make it more personal. And again, this is a practice exercise tonight, but what we're going to do is make all these handouts available. So even if you're not, what you wrote tonight is you're frustrated, you're not, oh, it could have been better. Don't worry, we're all practicing.
Michael, can I just add that vision and values usually kind of stay the same, right? They're kind of northern stars, but the problems and solutions will differ. So yes, this could be used multiple, but don't think you have to recreate this thing every time, right? You can personalize it to issue with the problem and solutions, but keeping vision and values.
Yeah, thank you, Katya. Thank you. All right, again, I know we're moving very quickly, but we also want to end on time. We really appreciate all of you attending and participating tonight. So let's go to the next slide, please, Allison. Oh, next one. Sorry, this is actually Katya. What Katya was saying is exactly right, and that's why those were together. And then finally, this is in the values quadrant. And what I want you to do is pick 1 or 2 of these statements and circle them. The ones that you like the best, or whatever you wrote in the problem solution. What's the value statement that it most closely aligns with what you want to talk about? And literally, I just want you to circle 1 or 2 of them. Okay, so now, believe it or not, you have in front of you a completed message box. You should have something in all 4 of the quadrants. Your idea for the vision, you're adding to make the problem and solution more personal, and then the value statements that you want to use. And now I'm going to go back to the principle. Now that you have this, don't speak outside the box. We're going to do an exercise that's about what if you're doing a 2 to 3 minute presentation. Maybe it's a testimony, maybe it's speaking to a community group. And what you're going to do, and Allison, next slide, please. Or what we're going to do together is we're going to put this all 4 quadrants into a little pitch. So what that means is each of you using your message box, write down your vision, and then talk about what's the problem, why does the problem matter? So now you're going right around counterclockwise the message box. Why does it matter? That's the ones that you circled, and just use those. Don't write something new. Today for practice, we're just going to use those verbatim. And then finally, what's the solution? So why don't we all take 2 or 3 minutes on your worksheet, and literally you're taking stuff off your message box and you're writing it onto your worksheet. Actually, we probably have 3 or 4 minutes for you all to do this. Then we're going to break into small groups and we're going to get a chance to try it out with one another, because this is definitely about practice.
I'm going to stop sharing and put the worksheet in the chat. Actually, maybe I don't need to do that.
I could even put the worksheet in the chat.
I think I just got it in there, but maybe double check me.
Yep. So again, the goal tonight is to take your message box and basically using something from each of the 4 quadrants, put together a 2 to 3 minute pitch or presentation that you might give. Take about 1 more minute to fill out our exercise worksheet, and then we're going to be broken into small groups. We're going to be in groups of 2 or 3, and there should be one of us from the Housing Alliance ROC Community Change team in the room with you. So if you have any questions, but we're really just going to try to practice here, because this is like muscle memory. Whenever we say we want to do something new, like, you got to first get your muscles in gear to be able to do that thing. And the first time you do it, like if you don't ever go jogging and then you go jogging, what happens, right? Your legs get sore. So it's okay. We might feel a little bit sore when we're doing this, but that's because we're developing the muscle memory that's going to make us a super powerful messenger like Mandy, like Katya.
We did just change the permissions on the Google Doc. Sorry. If you couldn't get in, try it again. Hopefully it will work this time.
And then I think actually let's take us into the small groups.
All right. Everybody keep working, and I will put us in breakout rooms.
And the instructions to the breakout rooms will basically be one person will go first, read their statement. The listener will say, did I hear all 4 quadrants? Did I hear one of the values messages verbatim? And then what did I really like about what I heard? And then do I have any suggestions of how it can be stronger? And then we'll switch. So everybody will get a chance to at least read through their pitch and get some feedback on it. All right? Take us away, Allison.
Give me 2 more minutes. Or maybe more. I don't know. Hold on.
Well, it looks like a lot of people are still writing some, that's how it is for me when I'm doing these exercises. It always takes me a little bit longer than the time allowed, but don't worry, this is practice.
All right, I'm opening the rooms.
Thank you, Allison.
I'm going to pause the recording while we go into the rooms.
Group, I pushed the wrong button. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It happens to the best Zoomers. Cesar, do you want to segue us and give it to Mandy?
Yeah. So hopefully you all had an opportunity to share a little bit, and I want to invite you to in the chat to add some thoughts around one thing you learned tonight in your small group, in the presentation, and if you are interested in learning more about this work, and if you, just like me, were inspired by seeing Mandy and Katya and the way that they showed up tonight, we invite you to a learning session on the housing justice narrative work that is coming up on April 6th. And in the chat, I will include the registration link. So please let us know what one thing you learned tonight and one thing you're taking away from this presentation in the chat as we begin to wrap up tonight. And I will pass it to Mandy.
Thank you, Cesar. Hi, everyone. It's me again. So I am here to talk about ROC. Residents Organizing for Change is a statewide network of people committed to advocating for safe, stable, and affordable housing for all Oregonians. ROC is the reason I'm talking to you today. They connected me to the fellowship and are responsible for many of the opportunities I've had over the last year, like being on the advisory committee for Project Turnkey, which was an incredible experience. Most of our members have faced housing instability in one way or another, and it's a great starting point for people with lived experience. We do training together, talk to legislators together, tear down the dominant narrative together, and support each other during difficult times. Before joining ROC, I was the only person I knew with lived experience of being unhoused who was doing this work. And now I have a team all over the state. We would love for you to join us. Our website and fearless leader Reina's email will be in the chat. And I'll kick it over to Cesar. Thanks again.
So once again, I want to invite you all to add any appreciations, learning in the chat. And as I mentioned, and I'll place in the message in the chat again, on April 6th, we are doing a learning session about the Housing Justice Narrative Fellowship, which was a 9-month program that folks like Katya and Mandy participated in, and others from across the United States. And so we're going to share a very quick 45-second video to inspire you and to see how this work really becomes owned by those that are most impacted.
Michael, I can't share the video, I'm sorry.
Well, sorry about the video, but we'll see. I did include the registration link online, so that's on April 6th. And if you go on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, and look for community change action, you will see those videos that we wanted to share.
Michael, you're on mute.
What I learned from my research and being invited into this fellowship is the importance and how impactful that narratives have on people in this advocacy.
This really puts the mic in the hands of the people who are most impacted.
These last 9 months, we've really developed something special here of how to address the public, how to address the persuadables, how to address the detractors.
Sharing our stories, we become that powerful tsunami of people who are going to make some powerful changes, and we're a force to be reckoned with.
Community change has gave us the right tools, the right strategies, and we have the right information now to be powerful.
It brings the people together in a sense because they listen to stories. They don't just listen to stats.
I'd say for a majority of us, we really don't like playing the part of a victim. And this narrative empowers folks to connect to one another, not from a victim mentality, but from a point of like, I'm overcoming this and we all need to overcome this. We have to have those conversations, and it has to be us. It always has to be us. So, with this narrative, it has given us an opportunity to see us inside of the problem and to see ourselves inside of the solution too.
Thanks, Michael, for sharing that. I love that video, and really appreciate all of you so much for being here tonight. And I'm going to turn it back over to Joel, who's going to wrap things up.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison, ROC members, others that helped lead us through this awesome training tonight. Really appreciate you dedicating your evening to us folks out here in the Columbia River Gorge, both sides of the river. And I hope that those of you who were able to participate learned something and can share it with our networks.